Hello, in this podcast we're learning about variables in an experiment, and by the end of this podcast you're expected to understand how to identify and control variables in an experiment. And this podcast is a little bit different from what I've done in the past. Like last year when I taught about experiments in biology, I did in the class because there was a demo that I really like to do, but we don't have time in class. This demo had to do with the Pepsi challenge, and just want to show you how I came about it. First of all, Pepsi used to have a commercial, and here's one of them.
The Pepsi challenge has been shown that more people prefer Pepsi over Coke, but some people still don't believe it.
Do you believe in the Pepsi challenge?
Absolutely not.
You picked? What did you pick?
All right, so maybe they're valid commercials.
Nationwide, more people prefer the taste of Pepsi over Coca-Cola.
Which did you pick?
Pepsi-Cola.
The Pepsi challenge. Take it. You'll believe it.
And what gave me the idea for this demonstration was a friend of mine once took the Pepsi challenge, and what happened was that the Pepsi was basically cold and carbonated, and the Coke was, in his words, warm, flat, and disgusting. Basically what he said was that this is warm, flat, and disgusting, it's got to be Pepsi. So what I did was I took a bottle of Coke and a bottle of Pepsi. The Coke was fresh out of the fridge, and the Pepsi was fresh out of the microwave. And you can just imagine what the reaction to that was. And I just called one person up to try it out. And here were some of the problems with my demonstration. And I used this demonstration sort of like more of an anti-demonstration to show what problems can result when you don't control your variables. First is with temperature. The Coke was cold, the Pepsi was hot. And everybody who has done this demonstration in the years that I've done it, even when they've come up and said, well, I know that Pepsi tastes better than Coke, everybody who does this says at this particular demonstration that the Coke tastes much better than Pepsi, and most of them frankly have a hard time not spitting out the Pepsi immediately. And the reason why is simply that it happens that the temperature interferes with the experiment so much that Coke tastes better than Pepsi, not because of the recipe for Coke and the recipe for Pepsi, but just because of the temperature. Another difference here is that usually carbonation makes something taste better, and that was another problem. Also, you want to have a large sample size, because when you have a large sample size, like people are different. And there are differences between people, and also if you're looking at animals or plants or whatever you're studying, there are individual differences. The larger your sample size is, the more that you average out those differences, and that's called sampling error. Like whenever you're asked a question of how you could improve an experiment, one way you can always improve it is by increasing the sample size. Another way you can always improve an experiment is by repeating the experiment. We only did this once, so there's no repetition with this. Another mistake that I put into my demonstration I didn't tell you about before was that first I had the person taste the Coke using a straw. Then I took that same straw and I put it in the Pepsi bottle. So some of the Coke got into the Pepsi bottle, and that basically contaminated the Pepsi. Another problem was that it wasn't a blind study. And this was a problem that they would see not just in my demonstration, but also in the commercial. In that while it's true in the commercial that the person who was tasting it didn't know which was which, the person who was giving the scientist in this demonstration, in this knew which was which, and consciously or in the commercial or subconsciously in a real experiment, they could have an effect on what was going on. So the way they do it in a real experiment is that when the experiment is going on, nobody knows which is, say, the Coke or the Pepsi or whatever you're studying. Now there are three types of variables in an experiment. There's something called an independent variable, a dependent variable, and also a constant or controlled variable. First, we'll look at the independent and dependent variables. I find the best way to identify them is by looking at the hypothesis. Now, the hypothesis here is Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Every hypothesis, you're going to find two variables in it. Sometimes you'll find more than two, but you'll always find at least two. If there's more than two, then the third one would be a constant variable. You'll always find the independent variable, and you'll always find a dependent variable in the hypothesis. So let's look at this hypothesis here. Coke tastes better than Pepsi. What are the two things here that are changing? One thing that's changing is the type of soda. We've got two variables in there. One value of the variable is Coke, and the other value of that variable is Pepsi. The second thing that changes in there, the second variable, is how good something tastes. And so those are the two variables, brand of soda and how good it tastes. Now, one of those variables, the independent, causes the other. So the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So if we look at these two variables, which depends on the other? Does how good it tastes depend on the type of soda? Or does the type of soda depend on how good it tastes? So obviously how good it tastes depends on what type of soda you're drinking. So the type of soda is the independent variable, and the dependent variable is how good it tastes. Another way of looking at it is that the independent variable is set by the scientist. The scientist decides what kinds of soda the subjects are drinking. And the dependent variable are the results, where the scientist is looking at a table of results that shows which each person said tasted better. Now, for each of the independent variables and dependent variables, in an experiment, in a controlled experiment, you'll only have one of each. If you have more than one of those, then it's not a controlled experiment and you can't tell which causes which. And that's actually was a main problem with what we had in my demonstration, because I had not everything was constant. All the other variables except for those two are constants. And that means the values have to be the same in all the samples. Like what I did in my demonstration was I changed the temperature. Temperature's got to be the same. The Coke and the Pepsi have to be the same temperature. I didn't make it the same temperature. Because I didn't make it the same temperature, that meant that the taste, the dependent variable, no longer depended on the type of soda. What it depended on was the temperature of the soda. And what I really found out was that cold soda tastes better than hot soda. Now we come to something that we really didn't need in the Pepsi challenge, and that is the control group. A control group is a group where the value of the independent variable is set to 0. And we use it to see the effect of something. And it's frequently used to see the effect of a drug. Like if you want to see if aspirin can stop headaches, you would need to use a control group, or else you wouldn't know that the headache went away due to the aspirin or due to something else. What you do when you test the drug is you give the person a placebo. Placebo is basically a fake drug. It could be like a sugar pill. It looks just like the other, and you have to give a placebo, because otherwise one group would know that they're getting medicine, the other group would know they're not getting medicine. And they've actually experimentally shown that if people think that they're getting medicine, they stand a better chance of getting better than people who don't. The placebo will control that variable of thinking that you're getting medicine. Now we come to the concluding questions. Number 1, name one problem with the Pepsi challenge experiment. Number 2, use the hypothesis Pepsi tastes better than Coke in the following 3 questions. A, identify the dependent variable. B, explain how you identify the dependent variable. C, identify one constant. And 3, what is a control group? And that concludes this podcast, and I'll see you in class tomorrow.